Hi, you guys, it's me again. Miss Fry. Thought I was gonna stop that with the next read aloud, but I'm not. We're gonna read Moo by Sharon Creech. She also wrote Walk Two Moons and I think a couple other ones. The Wanderer and Ruby Holler. Okay. This is about a cow, and a family. And I thought it would be kind of fun to start our year off with Keck and the cow and end our year with a cow named Zora. This is an interesting book, the way it's written, because the author does a lot of fun things with the words. She writes it in diagonal. She really plays with words. She writes a lot of capital letters. Puts in different kinds of fonts, so I'll try to do it all justice. All right. This is Moo, a novel by Sharon Creech. First chapter is That's Zora. The truth is, she was ornery and stubborn, wouldn't listen to anybody, and selfish beyond selfish, and filthy, caked with mud and dust, and moody. You better watch it, or she'd knock you flat. That's Zora I'm talking about. Nobody wanted anything to do with her. Zora, that cow. But first, before Zora, is the next chapter. I am Rena, 12 years old and 12 years and 2 months old, formerly of a big city, a city of monuments and people of many colors, a harlequin city of sights and noises, of museums and parks and music, and cockroaches and rats and mosquitoes and crickets and fireworks and traffic and helicopters whopping overhead and sirens screaming through the air. And that's how we lived for a time, me and my parents and brother zooming on the subway or creeping along in buses or cars into and around the city, trawling through the museums, ogling the dinosaurs and artifacts, ambling through the zoo, listening to the roars and the screeches and scrabbles and warbles, staring at the lazy crawls of bored animals. Yes, for a time, that's how we lived. Next chapter, Flight Path. Then one day, when we were stuck in traffic behind a tall gray bus spewing exhaust, with horns honking and people yelling and sirens wailing, on a day that was hotter than hot, my mother asked my father a question. A question can swirl your world. My parents had recently lost their jobs when the newspaper they worked for went out of business. We were on our way to drop my father off at another job interview. So my mother said, "Do you still like reporting?" "Not so much," my father admitted. "Is that what you see yourself doing 10 years from now?" Because that's the flight path we're on. I was sitting in the back seat with my brother, Luke, a 7-year-old complexity. Sometimes he acted as if he were 2, and sometimes 12. He was full of questions and energy and opinions, except when you wanted him to have any of those things. Luke was drawing with the black marker in the yellow notebook that was nearly always with him. He drew for hours and hours, contorted heroes leaping and jumping and vaporizing, bizarre enemies with gaping mouths and sharp talons and horns, and complicated towns with alleys and bridges and dungeons. In the car, when Mom said, "Because that's the flight path we're on," Luke said, "Flight path? We're not in an airplane, you know. We're in a car and we're on a road." But I noticed that he was adding a runway and an airplane to his drawing. Drivers all around us were honking their horns like crazy, and the smells and the heat and the noise were pouring in the windows and squeezing us from all sides. "Let's get out of here," my mother said. My father took his hands off the wheel and raised his palms to the sky. "No, I mean out of the city," my mother said. "Let's move." "To?" "Maine," I said. My parents turned to look at me. Then they looked at each other. Then they looked at me again. "Maine," they said. "Of course." My parents had met in Maine many years ago, and when they spoke of Maine, their voices had the glint of sea and sky. In the car that day, Maine just popped out of my head. I hadn't expected they would take me seriously. I'm glad I didn't say Siberia. Next chapter, which is how Which is how I came to meet Zora, though not quite so easily as it might sound, because first we had to give our landlord a month's notice, and then we had to clear out all our closets and cupboards in the dreaded storage garage. Then we had to lug some of that outside for a yard sale and the rest of the Salvation Army, and then we had to clean and watch as future renters tromped through our rooms, noting how small they were and how old and how dark, and it was embarrassing. And then there was the packing and moving of the beds and clothes and books and pots and pans. Ugh, it hurts my head to remember it. So let's just skip it. People said, my parents' friends said, "Are you crazy? And it gets cold in Maine, you know. And there are giant mosquitoes in Maine. And it gets cold in Maine, you know. And why? Why? But some others said, they have lots of lobsters there, and great blueberries in Maine, and beautiful ocean and mountains, and great skiing, and lots of lobsters, lots of blueberries. Though it does get cold there, you know." Luke said, how did this happen, this moving thing? In his yellow notebook, Luke drew a winged dragon scaled in gold, flying through purple skies, grasping a house, a car, beds, tables, and chairs in its black talons. Why Maine? Why did I say Maine that day? Let's move to Maine. Because I'd read a book about it, 3 books in fact. 2 were stories about a family's life on an island in Maine, and 1 was a book of photographs of rocky shores and lighthouses and vast oceans with breaking waves and high blue mountains. And while I was reading those books and looking at those pictures, I was there already in my mind. I was clambering over rocks and wading in the ocean. I was hiking up a mountain and standing at the top, peering down the steep hillsides to the ocean beyond. I was there. Maine. It had such a sound to it, such a feel. And yet, I'd always lived in the city. I was full of buses and subways and traffics and tall buildings and crowds of people and city noises, honking and sirens and helicopter whirring and city smells, bakeries and car exhaust, hot dogs and coffee, and city lights so bright. Was there room inside for the sights and sounds and smells of Maine? Would I know what to do and how to be in Maine? Friend withdrawal. The few friends I had didn't believe me when I told them we were moving to Maine, and then when I'd convinced them, they acted excited about it. But as the days went by, I realized they were already forgetting me. It seemed they didn't want to waste friend effort on someone who was leaving town. One of them said, "You're going to get all Maine-y." I wasn't sure what all Maine-y meant, but whatever it was, they had decided it was undesirable. My parents had similar reactions from their friends. At first, people thought they were joking, and then they seemed excited and curious, but gradually they became less and less interested. My mother was hurt by that, but my father said, maybe they're jealous, or maybe they feel you're abandoning them. When Luke told his latest friend, Toonie, that we were moving to Maine and that it was far away, and he couldn't come over to her house anymore, she socked him on the nose and called him a stupid doofy head. When Luke told Dad about his encounter with Toonie, Dad said, well, who knows? Maybe we're all stupid doofy heads. Welcome to Maine. With that white chalky paint that newlyweds write, just married, on their cars, we wrote, moving to Maine. And all along the way, as cars and trucks passed us, people honked their horns and waved. Some rolled down their windows and shouted, Maine! And some scribbled signs and held them up for us to see. Eat some lobster for me. And I love Maine. And we're so jealous. But one guy's sign read, it's cold there. At the border, we pulled over and posed behind the Welcome to Maine sign. People honked their horns like crazy as they sped past us. Maine. In a small town 3 hours up the coast, we parked by the post office and walked to a diner for lunch, and when we returned, there was a note on our windshield. Welcome to Maine. We hope you like it here. The ocean was a block away. You could smell that salty air. People were walking their dogs and their kids, and the church bells were chiming, and the sky was blue. Maine. Dad stepped in dog poop that oozed into every crevice of his running shoes, but still, Maine. We'd made it. Have you guys been to Maine? I haven't been. I think some of you guys go maybe in the summer. I'm not sure. Harbortown. It was the beginning of summer, and we thought we'd landed on another planet. A boat-bobbing, sea-salty harbor town with people strolling the docks, eating ice cream and lobster rolls. Gentle mountains rose up opposite the harbor and curled around it, wrapping the town in their blue-green embrace. How exactly did we get here? Luke said. He drew towering mountains and steep cliffs above jagged rocks and tiny, fragile boats bobbing in the ocean below. We made our way to the place my parents had rented, a small old house with a wood stove inside and an apple tree outside and a chipmunk on the doorstep and a chickadee nest in a lilac tree and spiders in the woodpile. That same day, our parents said, "Go on, ride your bikes, check out the town. We've got unpacking to do. Go." "What?" we said. "By ourselves?" In the city where we'd lived, there were few safe places for us to ride. Few places where we weren't competing with cars and trucks and buses and surprise clumps of kids armed with sticks and stones or wobbly bearded men spitting. But here in this little town by the sea, there were wide sidewalks and quiet curving lanes spreading like tree limbs from the trunk of the town center, and you could ride and ride the whole day long. We rode down streets and trails, discovering our new town, its people and dogs and old houses, its winding lanes and gnarled trees. One day, we passed a farm, and Luke shouted, "Oreo cows!" Black and white cows, black in front and back with a wide white fur belt. Black and white cows munched at the grass, and in between is black in front and back with a wide white fur belt. Okay, we'll try to describe that. It's getting tired on my tongue. A girl about my age in rubber boots stood near us on the other side of the fence. "Belted Galloways, they're called," she said. "Or just Belties for short. Purty, right?" A cow. Maybe I had imagined a cow was like a large lamb, soft, furry, gentle, uttering sweet sounds, but oh, not so, not so. One of the belted Galloways lumbered over the fence and pushed its enormous head with its enormous nose toward us and uttered a deep, deep, loud moo. So loud and deep as if it were coming from low down on the ground and traveling up through the cow's legs and body and head and out of that enormous, slobbery mouth. Moo. So loud and surprising that we jumped back, and the girl in the rubber boots gave us a pitying look, as if she were thinking, "Silly tourists." And I wanted to say, No, we're not tourists. We live here now." More cows ambled up to the fence, nudging their enormous heads and noses between the wires of the fence and bellowing the deepest, loudest moos. Luke's hands were pressed tight against his ears. Flies dipped here and there amid the smell of cow dung. The farm. Out riding around on our bikes, Luke and I passed that farm nearly every day. On the gate was a blue and white sign, Birchmere Farm. I'd never been to a farm before our move to Maine, and I wasn't sure what I thought of this one at first. On sunny days, it looked inviting, with its green pastures and its barns and cows dotting the hillsides and gathered in the pens. On the first rainy day, though, when Luke and I stopped by the fence, it looked muddy and sloppy and smelled of sawdust and manure. Flies dogged the animals and the stalls. Up close, the cows were thick and wide, with heads as big as kids, and black eyes the size of oranges, and wide, sweaty nostrils, and they let out loud, low moos. They scared me, to tell the truth. A rotating group of teenagers showed up each day to work with the animals. Only a few adults were around, driving tractors or trucks. We watched the teenagers fill feed bins and water buckets and climb fences and tromp through sawdust and lean against cows. Luke often sat on the grass and drew. His heroes, now, took on the look of farmers brandishing halters and conquering giant cow-like creatures. So Luke kind of draws his experiences that he's having, kind of like a journal entry. The house on Twitch Street. Just before you reach the farm, at the far edge of town, at the end of Twitch Street, was a tall, narrow house that tilted to one side. Thick, twisted vines crept up the side of the gray house, around doors and windows to the chimney top. The attic window was cracked and open, and from within you could hear the sound of a flute, high and light and gentle. Mrs. Falala lived in the house. Falala is how you say her name. It looks like Falala. Right there? But it's Falala. Most people agreed she had a cow and a pig, but some said she also had a goat and an alligator and a bear. Some people said not to bother Mrs. Falala because she was old. Others said not to bother her because she made weird things happen. One day our father took Luke and me to Mrs. Falala's house. Be respectful, my father said. No matter what you hear or see, be respectful to Mrs. Falala. An enormous golden cat fell straight down from a tree overhead, landing at our feet. The cat reared back on its hind legs and bared its teeth and claws, and out of its mouth came a menacing hiss. Our father ushered us up the walk. Pay no attention, he said. It's just a cat. A fat black hog, that's a pig, lurched into view from behind the house and raced toward the cat, squealing all the while, the most unappealing squeal. Pay no attention, our father said, urging us toward the front door. High above, from the open attic window, floated the delicate melody of a flute, while behind us the hog chased the cat round and round the yard, and a bright green parrot perched on the porch and squawked at us as we climbed the steps to the door trimmed in vines. A sign on the door read, "Wrong door, go to back." And so, dodging the hog and the cat under the watchful eyes of the bright green squawking parrot, we obeyed. A sign on the back door read, "Who are you?" We looked at each other, me and my father and Luke. Luke said, "No way, not going in there. She'll probably chop us up to pieces." My father said, "Be respectful." He knocked. Around the corner, hog squeal and cat hiss. A face appeared at the window beside the door. A pale, thin, old, wrinkled face. The hog knocked Luke over, and the cat jumped on the hog's back, and as my father and I battled the hog and the cat, the door opened, and a long, pale, thin, old, wrinkled arm reached out and pulled my brother inside, and my father and I tumbled in after him. Couple more. Inside. At the end of the long, thin arm was Mrs. Falala, clutching Luke and kicking the door shut. "You is leaving?" she asked. Her voice was unexpected, full of honey. "Is you?" My father stepped forward. Yes, we are, living, yes." He handed her 2 books. "From my wife," he said. "She asked me to bring them to you. You met her, apparently, at the doctor's?" Mrs. Falala closed one eye. "And where is she, this wife? Why not she bring? She is living, yes?" Yes, she is living. She had an appointment today, but living, yes, most certainly." Mrs. Falala studied the covers of the books. Down her back trailed a long, white braid, which she flicked like a horse's tail. "Wrong books," she said. "Wrong? Wrong." She pushed the books back to my father. She turned to me and Luke. "And you? Who are you? And you?" When we told her our names, she tapped my forehead. "Is peculiar, no, this name Rena?" Mrs. Falala caught me trying to peer around her into the room behind. She kicked that door closed. "Is nothing there. No going in there." I glanced at the ceiling, straining to hear the sound of the flute, but there was silence. "What you is looking at? Shoo, nothing here. Goodbye now. Go home." As we left the house of Mrs. Falala, seagulls white and gray arrived one by one and perched on the ridge atop her house, not just a few, first 10, then 20, then 30 or more, until they were lined up, wing to wing, a row of feathered soldiers guarding her house, and the flute music, high and light, floated from the attic window. On Luke's arm, where Mrs. Falala had held him, was a pale blue mark in the shape of a leaf, and in the sky, 2 white clouds, joined to form a flying girl, long white hair trailing behind. The hog and the cat and the parrot were gone. I listened for them. What I heard was the faintest moo, moo. Next chapter we're not going to read, but it's called "Don't You Touch Me." I don't know who's going to say that, but my money's on either Luke or Mrs. Falala. Okay. Digging this book. Listen, nothing can replace the war I finally won and the war that saved my life. But we soldier on. We're just gonna keep at it and finding something different. Different, as I keep saying, different can be good. All right, thanks for hanging in there with me. I miss you guys. Talk to you soon.